Hi guys, I'm really glad you're here. Welcome back to CRYPTID'S Den. Life can be a lot sometimes, and if today's been heavy, just know you're not alone. I hope being here brings you even a little comfort. Let me know where you're watching from and how you're doing. I truly want to hear from you. And if you haven't yet, hit that subscribe button and leave a comment. Your presence here means more than you know. Now, let's get into it. You've heard of Bigfoot. But what if I told you he once saved a human child? This wasn't a monster. Not a myth. He was something else. Something that understood loneliness better than any of us. I didn't run into the woods because I was afraid of the world. I ran because I couldn't live with myself. After my sister died, because of a mistake I made, I vanished into the forest of willow shade. No phones, no internet, just silence thick enough to drown in. And that's where I met him. A sound, one stormy night. A cry that wasn't quite animal, not quite human. I followed it, and found a fawn gently laid on a bed of moss. Beside it, a footprint, huge, human-shaped, and beneath the fawn, a perfect circle of leaves. I started leaving gifts, apples, bread. In return, moss-wrapped feathers, carved stones. One night, I saw him. A sorrowing figure in the trees. I raised my hand. He raised his. We spoke in sketches. We shared silence. And one night, I whispered, "You don't know how lonely I am." But something out there did. His name was Haven. He wasn't just a legend. He was a guardian, a healer. And when hunters came with rifles and cameras, I had to help him escape. In the next few minutes, you'll learn how he mourned a child, buried him with honor, and taught me something no human had in years. What it means to be truly seen. This story is real. His memory lives on in the pages I left behind. If you found this, don't fear what you don't understand. Because sometimes, love doesn't look human, but it speaks just the same. I didn't come here to be found. The road up to Willowshade wasn't even marked. Just a stretch of cracked blacktop swallowed by firs and a kind of silence that feels like it's listening. When I first pulled up to the cabin, the sky was already bleeding into twilight, orange streaks brushing the tops of the trees. The air damp like something just cried and never quite stopped. I killed the engine and just sat there, hands on the wheel, knuckles white. It took me a full 3 minutes to open the door. The place was exactly as described in the listing. Secluded, rustic, no Wi-Fi, no neighbors. A patchwork of moss-covered wood and cracked windows, half-eaten by vines. But it didn't need to be perfect. I wasn't looking for comfort. I was looking for somewhere the world couldn't follow me. Somewhere my guilt couldn't echo. I unlocked the door, stepped inside, and let the must and cedar wrap around me like a blanket I didn't earn. One bedroom, a sagging couch, a wood stove that looked like it hadn't burned anything in years. I unpacked only what I needed: journal pen, canned soup, 2 blankets. I didn't even hang my coat. Just dropped it on a chair and stood by the window, watching nothing. That night, I didn't sleep. Not really. My mind kept replaying the sound. The moment of metal twisting, her scream. The way my hands froze on the wheel like they didn't belong to me. I turned my face to the pillow and bit down hard. Like maybe if I bled enough, it would count for something. The next morning was cold. Mist clung to the ferns, and everything smelled like wet bark. I stepped outside barefoot, felt the chill bite at my toes. Something about it made me feel alive for a second. I started a routine. Coffee. Journal. Walk the edge of the clearing. Pull weeds in the garden someone else had long given up. Pretend I was rebuilding something. It was the 4th night when I heard it. Not an animal. Not a person. It started as a low hum, almost like wind, but it wasn't. It rose, staggered, broke off like something trying to speak through a throat not made for human words. I froze in bed, eyes open, barely breathing. It came again, closer this time, a soft, drawn-out groan full of pain, like something old was breaking apart under the weight of its own body. I grabbed my flashlight, threw on my coat, and stepped into the dark. The forest swallowed me. Leaves whispered underfoot. Branches creaked above like tired bones shifting. The further I walked, the more I felt it. The sense of being watched, but not threatened. Just seen. I followed the sound, heart pounding so loud it drowned everything else. My beam cut through the mist, and then I saw it. A shape. Tall. Still. For a second, my brain tried to file it under a tree. But trees don't shift their weight. Trees don't have shoulders. It vanished before I could process it, gone into the black, like smoke caught in a draft. And then I saw the clearing. There, in the center, was a fawn. Small, legs curled awkwardly beneath it, but alive. It had been placed, gently, on a bed of dried leaves, not fallen, not wounded by claws or teeth, as if someone or something had tried to save it. My flashlight flickered. I knelt beside the animal, hands trembling. Its breathing was shallow but steady. I looked around. No tracks, but then, just beside the fawn, a footprint, not boot, not paw. It was massive, human-shaped, but far too large, too wide, deep in the soil like whoever left it weighed as much as a bear. I should have run. I should have screamed, but I didn't. Instead, I whispered, "Hey, you did this, didn't you? I don't know who I was talking to. Maybe the trees, maybe the air, maybe whatever was still standing just out of sight." I tore part of my flannel shirt and began wrapping the fawn's leg. The cloth soaked up blood, but the wound wasn't fatal. As I worked, my voice came out soft. "I don't know if you can hear me, but thank you for trying." And then something broke inside me. "I'm hurting too," I whispered. But no one's putting bandages on me. My throat closed. I held the fawn a little tighter. For a moment, we were two broken things huddled together in a world too loud to care. Eventually, I left the fawn nestled in the leaves. I didn't know if it would survive, but something told me it had a chance. Before I left, I placed a red apple on the ground. Next to it, I tucked a small piece of paper under a stone. "Thank you," it read, "for not letting it die alone." The walk back to the cabin felt heavier, like the woods were carrying my grief with me. I didn't sleep that night either. I kept the front light on, just in case. Morning came gray and soft, the kind of light that makes everything feel like memory. I stepped outside, half expecting nothing. But on the top step, laid so gently it could have been placed by wind, was a single feather, long, black, wrapped in a ring of moss and leaves. I stared at it, heart thudding. It was an answer. Something out there had heard me. And maybe, just maybe, I wasn't alone in my pain after all. It started small. The day after I found the feather, I left another apple on the stone, not out of superstition, just curiosity, and something else I didn't want to name yet, a part of me that was starting to hope. I added a small slice of bread, a piece of jerky I had in a tin, nothing fancy, just offerings, like you'd leave at a grave, or for a guest you're not sure will ever come to dinner. That night, I barely slept. I kept checking the window like a kid on Christmas Eve. But there was nothing. No movement, no sound, just the wind stirring the tops of the trees and the deep hum of forest silence. In the morning, the food was gone. Not dragged, not scattered. Just gone. In its place were three things: a piece of bark, carved roughly with a circle and two slashes through it, a wildflower I couldn't name, purple with white tips, and a smooth stone that had been split clean down the center, like it had broken naturally, but placed intentionally. Together, I stared at them for a long time. This wasn't random. This was communication. That realization hit harder than I expected. I sat down right there on the step and tried to breathe. Something out there wasn't just watching me. It was responding, thinking, choosing what to give. Over the next few days, I kept it going. A berry muffin, a ribbon I once wore in my hair, a small mirror from my bag. And each time, something came back. A bundle of fur tied with grass, a tiny pine cone stained dark, almost like ink, a bird skull so clean it gleamed like porcelain. They were gifts, or messages, or both. The rain came back heavy one evening, one of those Oregon storms that hits like the sky just couldn't hold it anymore. Thunder rolled low. The trees bowed under it. I built a fire inside and curled up with my journal, but my eyes kept drifting to the door. I don't know what I was waiting for. A knock, a howl. Instead, the power went out. The silence after the fridge died felt massive. I lit a candle, then another, then stood in front of the window, pressing my fingers to the glass like a kid trapped in a dream. That's when I saw it. Out there, standing between the trees. It wasn't lightning. It wasn't a trick of the wind. It was real, solid, tall, and still. Two eyes glowed faintly. Not bright like a predator's, not red, just illuminated. Like warm coals, watching. My body froze, but my breath didn't. It hitched hard. I blinked, and it didn't move. It didn't vanish. So I opened the door. The rain slammed me like a wave, but I stepped out anyway, barefoot, shirt sticking to my skin. The candlelight behind me spilled onto the porch and just barely touched the tree line. It was still there. I lifted my hand. It didn't flinch. After a long pause, it did the same. Lifted one massive arm and held it midair, mimicking me. I don't know how long we stood like that. I was shaking. Not from fear, but from something deeper, like standing at the edge of a truth I wasn't ready for but couldn't walk away from. I whispered, "I see you." The shape slowly lowered its arm, then stepped back, swallowed again by the trees, like it hadn't been standing there at all, but it had. I knew it had. I stayed on the porch until my legs went numb. Then I went inside and sat by the fire, dripping and speechless. I cried. I don't cry easy. But it wasn't even about the fear or the wonder. It was the weight, the unbearable ache of being seen after so long of not being, of someone, something, acknowledging my presence in this world without demanding anything from me. I sobbed like I'd been holding my breath for years. The next morning, I didn't know what to do, so I wrote. I pulled out a spare notebook, the small brown one with a broken elastic strap, and wrote a note on the first page. "If you understand this, tell me about you." Then I drew a picture. Me, the fawn, the feather. And I left it out there, where I always left the food. No fruit this time. No bread. Just the notebook and a pen tied to it with twine. And then I waited. Nothing. 2 days. Still nothing. I started to wonder if I'd crossed a line. But on the third morning it was back. The notebook was damp, but still closed. My hands shook as I opened it. Inside were 6 pages, filled, charcoal smudges. Rough, wide strokes, shapes, not words, but meanings. There was a drawing of the same fawn, legs tucked beneath it, a hand reaching out. There was a figure, towering, with small animals around it. There was the shape of a tree split by lightning, a circle with a line through it, again and again, almost like a signature. But what stopped me, what rooted me in place, was the last page. It showed a large figure, bent down, its head touching something small. A child? Maybe. It was hard to tell. But the emotion in the image was clear. Grief, tenderness, remembrance. The figure wasn't wild. It wasn't monstrous. It was mourning. I touched the page. My throat tightened. Something had happened to this creature. Something real, and it had trusted me enough to show it. I stood in the quiet of my cabin, holding a notebook full of answers I couldn't read, but somehow understood. I whispered, "You're not a monster." The wind outside picked up, brushing against the eaves like fingers on a drum. "You're just alone." At night, I sat by the window again. And this time, I didn't wait with fear. I waited with company, even if I couldn't see him, even if he never came back. I waited with the knowledge that someone out there had reached across the silence and found me. I started calling him Haven, not out loud, not at first. Just in my journal, in little notes scribbled between drawings. Haven left a stone again today. Haven didn't take the apple this time. It felt strange, naming something I'd barely seen. Something I still wasn't sure was even real. But somehow, it fit. He was the only thing in that forest that didn't make me feel afraid. And God knows, I needed somewhere. Someone I could feel safe around, even if they never said a word. The drawings he left kept changing. What started as rough shapes, scattered animals and figures, slowly began to build into something more. Something intentional. Pages filled with what looked like stories or memories. A large figure always appeared in the center. Looming, yes, but never threatening. Always surrounded by smaller shapes, deer, foxes, birds, and something else that looked almost human, small, childlike. The lines were thick, sometimes messy, but there was feeling in every stroke, like he was carving them with purpose, not just instinct. I began leaving more paper, more charcoal. He never took the pen again. There was one morning I followed the edge of the creek, like I usually did, collecting mushrooms and trying not to think too much. I'd walked that path a dozen times, but that day something was different. The birds weren't singing. No wind moved through the trees. Even the air felt thicker, like it was holding its breath. That's when I saw it. A bird. A crow. Tangled in a piece of fishing net, stuck just above the waterline between two roots. Its wings were flapping in panic, but it couldn't get free. The net was digging into its leg, cutting deeper every time it moved. I started down the bank, heart pounding. I wasn't sure I'd be fast enough or brave enough. Then I stopped because someone was already there. Kneeling in the shallow creek was Haven. I didn't make a sound, but he turned his head toward me slowly, like he already knew I'd been there all along. He was huge, not just tall, monumental, covered in dark hair, soaked from the knees down. His hands so large they could have wrapped around my entire torso. But what hit me harder than his size was his gentleness. He was using just 2 fingers, 2 thick, careful fingers to unwind the net from the bird's leg. His movements were slow, patient. The kind of patience I hadn't seen in another living soul in years. The bird stilled under his touch, its eye wide, but it didn't fight anymore. And Haven looked at me again. Not startled, not angry, just aware. Like he knew exactly what I was seeing, what it meant. I didn't step closer. I didn't speak. I only nodded. He blinked once, and then, with the same care he'd shown the fawn, he placed the crow on a bed of moss beside the water and stood. He towered above the creek, framed by the light filtering through the trees. For a second, I thought he might vanish again, melt into the forest like he always did. But he didn't. He stepped back, gave the bird space, and then turned his eyes toward the sky like he was waiting for it to fly. I whispered, "You're not a monster." He heard me. I know he did, because he lowered his head, slow and deliberate, and held it there. It wasn't submission. It wasn't fear. It wasn't fear. It was something like understanding. He stepped back, fading into the trees like a shadow stretching away from the sun. No crash of branches, no stomping, just the forest reclaiming one of its oldest, quietest guardians. I ran down to the moss bed. The crow was breathing, stunned, but alive. I held it in my hands and whispered, "He saved you. Just like he saved me." I waited until the bird fluttered off before I moved. That night, I sat by the fire, tracing the line of the drawings he'd left one by one. The same large figure. The same animals. The same steady sense of sorrow in the way it all hung together. He wasn't just showing me what he saw. He was telling me what he'd lost. And somewhere deep in my chest, a thread pulled tight and then frayed. It wasn't pity. It wasn't even awe. It was something deeper. Like two wounds recognizing each other by the way they ached in the quiet. Later, I took one of the drawings. My favorite one, the one where he's kneeling beside a fox, and pinned it above my bed. I stared at it in the dark, listening to the wind tap gently against the windows like it was asking to come in. I whispered, "You're not trying to scare anyone, are you?" No answer. But I didn't need one. I knew what he was. He was the part of the world that stayed kind even after it had been broken. He was what it meant to protect without asking for thanks. He was the only thing I'd seen in a long time that still remembered how to care. And then, just as I started to drift off, a sound cut through the night. Loud, sharp, distant, but clear. A gunshot. It echoed once. Then, silence. The kind of silence that presses against your skin, that makes you sit up even when your body begs you to stay down. Something was wrong. Someone else was in these woods, and they weren't looking to understand. I didn't ask him to take me there. I don't even know how he knew I needed it. Maybe it was the way I'd been acting. Too quiet even for me, distracted, restless, caught in that loop of memory I couldn't break. That sound from the other night had crawled into my bones. Gunfire doesn't belong in Willowshade. Not like that. It tore a hole in the calm, and it didn't seal back up. The morning after, I found a new drawing tucked beneath the moss stone at my porch. Heaven's lines were darker this time, heavier. The image was simple. Him, standing beside a tree, one hand reaching back towards something, me, I think, and something else on the ground. Small, marked by a circle of stones and what looked like a bloom. I didn't understand it at first, but when I stepped into the woods later that day, he was already waiting. He stood at the edge of the ferns, half in shadow, as still as bark. But I could feel the weight of his gaze on me. He didn't move until I took a step forward, then another. The distance between us closed without a word. He turned and began to walk, and I followed. He didn't take me down any path I recognized. We moved through thickets and soft creek beds, over fallen logs and beneath low-hanging branches that brushed my hair with damp fingers. The air smelled like cedar and wet stone, like something ancient was breathing just beneath the surface of the earth. It was almost an hour before I saw it. A clearing. Sunlight spilled through the trees like honey, catching on the moss in little gold pools. The ground was uneven. Raised mounds dotted the space like quiet humps of earth. Each one had been arranged. Stones ringed their borders. Some had flowers, dried and braided. Others had bits of carved wood or feathers standing upright like tiny flags. I stopped walking. My throat closed around something I didn't expect. They were graves, tiny ones. Dozens of them. Not human, I realized. Not all, at least. Some were too small, too wide, shaped for creatures that had no words or tombstones. Birds, foxes, squirrels, and a few were larger. Not by much, but shaped differently, more carefully arranged. One had a child's mitten pressed flat in the dirt. Another had what looked like a smooth stone toy laid atop it, the edges worn from touch. I looked at Haven. He was kneeling now, beside one particular mound, not touching it. Just there, his head bowed, his hand resting on the earth with a kind of reverence I hadn't known was possible. I stepped closer. That's when I saw the mark on the tree beside it, a small handprint, pressed into the bark. Human-sized. Not a baby, a child, maybe 5 or 6. Stained faintly darker, as if it had once been painted with ash or clay and weathered with the years. Below it, gouged softly into the trunk, were 5 shallow lines, like a large hand had tried to mirror the smaller one, or maybe protect it. Haven let out a sound I'd never heard from him before. Not pain, not a growl, just a low hum, deep, vibrating. Grief given shape. I sat down in the moss beside him. I didn't ask questions. I didn't need to. This was a memory, a sacred one. Something had happened here. Someone had been loved and lost. I stared at the grave and tried to imagine it, the story behind it, the tiny footprints once running through these trees, the laughter that might have echoed in this clearing, and the silence that followed. A child. I didn't know who they were, but I knew what it meant to bury someone you'd give anything to save. I reached out and touched the bark, just below the little handprint. My fingers trembled. I lost someone too, I whispered. He turned to me slowly. His eyes, God, his eyes. They weren't wild. They weren't primal. They were old. So old. Like they'd watched stars go out and come back again. Like they'd watched love rise and fall and never quite leave. My sister, I said. Her name was Emily, and I was the one driving. That silence, deep, pulsing, full of breath and the rustling of the trees, wrapped around us like a blanket that had holes too big to keep the cold out. And somehow, that felt right, like grief should always let a little wind in. A reminder that we're still breathing. He reached toward the dirt with both hands, his massive fingers rearranging a few stones that had toppled over with time. Then he paused and pushed something toward me. A small circle of bark, carved with a simple mark. A line through a circle, his mark. I took it and held it close. It wasn't language, but it meant something. Maybe acknowledgement. Maybe trust. Maybe forgiveness. We stayed there for a long time. When I finally stood, having stayed kneeling, I touched his shoulder gently, and he didn't flinch. Thank you, I said. Not for showing me the clearing, not even for sharing this part of himself, but for reminding me I wasn't the only one carrying ghosts. As we turned to leave, something flickered in the trees. A light, artificial, sharp, like lead. Then voices, muffled, distant, but wrong. Not the voices of animals or wind, human. Strangers. Haven froze, back straightening, head tilting just slightly toward the noise. I grabbed his arm. Don't run. He didn't. But he did vanish. Not literally, just one blink. And he was already moving through the brush, silent as dusk. I stood there, heart hammering, and watched as the beams of light grew nearer. Men with cameras, backpacks, one holding something slung over his shoulder that glinted in the last ray of sun. A rifle. They hadn't seen me yet, but they would. And I had the sudden, awful feeling that whatever peace Haven had known in this forest, it was about to change. Maybe forever. I should have known the forest wouldn't stay quiet forever. They came in through the northern slope, 2 SUVs and a drone buzzing above the tree line like a mechanical insect that didn't belong. I watched from behind a ridge near the gravel turnout, crouched so low my knees ached, my breath wrapped in fog. They weren't hikers. They weren't even pretending to be. High-end camera gear. Hiking packs too clean. One of them had a shotgun slung low across his back like some kind of trophy hunter playing pretend. The one in the leather vest was barking orders. middle-aged. Sharp beard, sunglasses even though the sun hadn't broken through the clouds in days. He looked out of place in every way, and at the same time, too comfortable in command. That was Marcus. I didn't know his name then, but I'd learn it soon enough. They weren't hiding what they were here for. I heard it in the way they spoke. Movement near the southeast ridge. Check thermal. We need a clean shot of the creature's gait. Not a creature. The creature. Singular. Specific. They were looking for him. For heaven, I stayed hidden until they moved off toward the old fire road. When I made it back to the cabin, my hands were shaking. I packed the drawings, the notebooks, everything I'd saved. I didn't know what else to do. It felt like the walls were getting thinner. Like every day the space between his world and ours was shrinking, and not in a good way. That afternoon, he came to me. No drawings, no gifts. He just stood there, behind the tree line. Half in mist, half in shadow. He knew. I don't know how, but he knew. I walked out to meet him. No shoes, just socks wet from dew. I didn't speak, just looked up at him and tried to figure out how to say, they don't understand you and they never will. But I didn't need to say anything. He turned and walked. I followed. He brought me to the clearing again, but not the graves this time, further south. Toward the cliffs. Toward the parts of the forest that don't have names on maps. We moved in silence. Birds scattered, but not from him. From the noise behind us. The dull thump of boots and gear and man-made intrusion. At the edge of a rise, he stopped. Below us, nestled between two ridgelines, was a den, or something like it. Hollowed out beneath a fallen cedar, blanketed in moss. Inside were traces, faded bedding of leaves, bones of small animals, sticks arranged in shapes I recognized from the drawings. He stepped inside and sat, his massive back bent forward, like he'd done it 1,000 times before. I didn't step in. I stood at the mouth and watched him reach for something buried under a rock, an old toy. Faded plastic, a figure. A little man with a red cape and broken legs. I felt my breath catch. He held it like it mattered, like it had once meant the world. Then he placed it down, gently, on a shelf of stone, and looked at me. That's when I heard footsteps. They weren't trying to be quiet. I ducked low, heart pounding. Heaven stood slowly, his shoulders wide, his head turned toward the sound. But he didn't run. Not yet. A voice echoed through the trees. Marcus, over here. I've got movement. I recognized that voice. The man from earlier. The one holding the drone remote. They were close. I grabbed Haven's arm. Instinct, maybe. It was like grabbing a mountain. He didn't react. Just looked at me again, and something passed between us. A question. A choice. He stepped back into the trees. Vanished the way he always did. Next part happened too fast. I heard the clicking first. Shutters, camera flashes, that soft electric whine of a lens zooming in, then a sharp intake of breath. Someone said, "Oh my God, not fear, wonder," but it was short-lived because the guy with the rifle raised it. I didn't think. I ran out from behind the tree line and screamed. "Stop!" Everyone turned. I must have looked insane. Mud-streaked, wild-haired, barefoot in the moss. But it worked. For a second it worked. The guy froze. His rifle lowered an inch. Then Marcus stepped forward. He didn't look surprised to see me. Just tired. Like some part of him had already expected this. "You've seen it too," he said. Not a question. I nodded. He didn't smile, didn't smirk. He just sighed and said, "You don't understand what this means." "Yes, I do," I said. "More than you think." Later, back at their camp, he let me watch some of the footage. It was raw, shaky, but clear. Haven, crouched in the rain, offering berries to a limping fox, not once touching it. Just placing the food and waiting. No snarls. No threat. The fox took the berries and limped off, having stood and disappeared into the brush. That was it. That's all it was. Compassion caught on film. Marcus leaned back and looked at me. I saw one of them when I was a kid, he said. Nobody believed me. They said it was trauma. Imagination. I stopped talking about it after a while, but I never forgot. So I made this my work. Finding proof. Telling stories that no one else could. I said nothing. He tapped the screen again. This changes everything. This is the footage I've waited 30 years for. But what happens to him if you show it? I asked. He didn't answer. Not right away. Then he said something I didn't expect. I don't know. That night, I sat by the fire in the cabin and stared at the feather he gave me the first week. It looked smaller now. Or maybe I just understood more. Not everything needs to be proven. Not everything that's real survives the spotlight. I left a new note the next morning. Not for Haven this time. For whoever might come next. It said, "What I found here is worth protecting, even if the world isn't ready for it." But I think they already found it anyway, because by nightfall, someone had leaked the footage, and the world was no longer looking away. He showed up at my door just after dusk. No camera crew, no clipboard, no gear, just Marcus. His shoulders were slumped like he'd been carrying something for too long. His boots were caked in mud. He didn't knock. He just stood there on the edge of the porch, hands in his pockets, waiting like he didn't know if I'd let him speak or slam the door in his face. I opened it before he could say a word. He looked at me for a long second, like he was studying my face for changes, like he wanted to ask if I still believed in what I saw. "You were right," he said finally. I stepped aside. We sat in silence for a while. Firelight flickered across the cabin walls. The only sounds were the crackle of the wood stove and the occasional distant calls of coyotes. He didn't look at me when he spoke again. That video, it's everywhere now. Over 4 million views in 2 days. I tried to stop it. I didn't say anything. I knew it wasn't enough. They're calling it the gentle giant. Reddit's gone feral. News vans were circling the ranger station this morning. Some forum thinks it's an alien. Others say it's a hoax, but nobody's talking about what it actually is. I turned toward him. "And what do you think it is?" He blinked slow, then said the only thing that ever looked me in the eye and didn't ask for anything. That hung between us for a while. I poured us tea. He didn't touch his. He told me everything. When he was 9, his family camped near the east ridge of Willowshade. It was a dry summer. His dad had left him alone for 10 minutes, just 10, to go grab the lantern from the truck. Marcus wandered too close to the ravine and slipped. Not far, but enough to tear his ankle open and knock the wind out of him. He cried until his throat was raw. And then something came. He didn't see it fully, just a shape that stood between him and the sun. A massive hand reached out, not to grab him, not to scare him, but to push the brush away so the light could fall on his face. That was all. Just light, just presence. By the time his father found him, the shape was gone. He told his parents. They laughed. Said it was shock. Said he must have seen a bear. His friends made jokes. His therapist called it trauma projection, so he buried it, turned it into obsession, built his whole life on trying to prove that moment wasn't madness. "I think I wanted the world to see what I saw," he said quietly. "To believe me? But you didn't think about what it would cost," he nodded. "That night, I brought him somewhere I'd never taken another soul. Back to the graves. He didn't speak when we arrived. He stood at the edge, the wind shifting the collar of his coat, and just looked. The stones, the braided vines, the little offerings tucked into roots and leaves. I watched him walk between the mounds, hands at his sides, eyes wide in a way I hadn't seen before. He stopped in front of the same one I always did, the child's grave. The handprint still marked the tree. Still faint, still there. Below it, moss had grown around the shallow carvings. Haven's signature, pressed into bark like a permanent memory. Marcus reached out and brushed his fingers over the indent. And then he broke. Not loudly, not with sobs. Just a collapse, shoulders caving, knees buckling. A man who had kept something locked inside for too long. He didn't say his name. He didn't need to. I knelt beside him and waited. Later, when the moon had climbed higher and the forest was wrapped in silver, he finally whispered. His name was Noah. He was 5. He'd been sick for months, one of those rare conditions that steals strength like smoke slips through cracks. No doctor had been able to do more than delay the inevitable. Marcus had brought him here that summer. One last trip, one last breath of clean air, one last night under stars before the hospitals came again. But he turned away for one moment, one single moment. And when he turned back, Noah was gone. He screamed for hours. Rangers came. Helicopters. Dogs. Nothing. Days later, they found his backpack beside the creek. Everyone assumed the worst. That Hyde slipped, drowned. They grieved. They moved on. Marcus didn't. And now, standing in the middle of a hidden graveyard with his knees in the dirt, he whispered the thing he'd never said to anyone. Heaven had been there, had tried to help, had done what no one else could. He'd cradled a child who had no more days left, given him shelter, soft ground, silence, a death with dignity. That was what all of this had been about. Every offering, every drawing, every look. Not proof, not curiosity, memory, love. I stood and looked around the clearing, and suddenly everything Heaven had done made sense. He wasn't hiding. He was mourning. Not just the world that feared him, but the one little soul who hadn't. That was why he came back. That was why he kept giving. And that was why this footage, this viral sensation, was a threat bigger than bullets. Because the world doesn't know how to treat kindness when it comes in unfamiliar shapes. We walked back in silence. The air felt thicker, like the trees were listening. Just before the cabin came into view, Marcus stopped. He turned to me. I can't undo what's out there. But I can choose what happens next. You're going to kill the project. He nodded. Burn the tapes. Shut it down. Tell them it was staged. GGI. Whatever it takes. I wanted to believe him, and I think I did. Whatever it takes, I wanted to believe him. But even then, I knew the fire was already spreading. The question now wasn't how to stop it. It was how to keep him safe when the world finally arrived. It all happened faster than I thought it would. One morning, the woods were just woods. That night, there were tents staked along the logging road, vans with satellite dishes on top, and strangers in fleece jackets whispering into walkie-talkies. The air smelled different. Smoke, fuel, battery heat. All the soft things were being pushed out. I could feel it. The silence that used to live in the trees had packed up and left. Marcus and I didn't speak much after that. We didn't need to. There wasn't time for anything except doing what had to be done. He slipped maps under my cabin door at sunrise. I marked the patrol routes, the places we knew Heaven never went. We had maybe 12 hours. That was it. If we waited longer, the forest would be crawling with people who didn't care what they were about to ruin. We made a plan. Marcus would go with the team that had set up near the North Ridge. He'd talk them in circles, take them up the wrong paths, act like they were close but not quite. Give me space, give him time. I went the other way. Heaven was already waiting. He stood just past the edge of the garden. His shoulders hunched slightly like he already knew, like he'd felt the tremor under his feet before it reached mine. He didn't move when I approached. He didn't offer a gift. He didn't draw. I think this time, I was the one who had to lead. I whispered, "We can't stay here." He blinked once, then turned. Then we ran. I've never moved like that before. Through brush, over stone, under branches so low they scratched my scalp raw. Heaven moved beside me. Not ahead, not behind. Like he wanted me to see. Like this was something I had to understand for myself. We didn't follow a trail. We followed instinct. He led me to a part of willow shade I'd never seen. I thought I knew that forest like my own skin. But this place was different. Tucked deep between two ridgelines, shielded by rock and fog and some kind of quiet that felt holy. A valley, but not just that. A sanctuary. It opened before us slowly, like the forest was lifting its palms. There were wildflowers I'd never seen, tall and white, swaying even when the wind didn't blow. Sunlight broke through in golden strands, catching in the mist like silk thread. A stream cut down the middle, clear and bright and alive with fish. I swear, even the birds sounded softer here, like they knew. Then I saw them. First just one, a deer young, watching from the trees. Then more, foxes moving slow across the moss, birds hopping from branch to branch, a family of raccoons drinking from the stream, unbothered, unafraid. They weren't running. They weren't hiding. They were coming to him. Haven stepped forward into the center of it all and raised one hand. I stood frozen. It felt like watching the heart of the world beat. He turned back to me. And that's when I realized. This wasn't just where he lived. This was where he kept them safe. The hurt, the limping, the lost. This valley was his promise. Not just to the child he couldn't save, but to everything he still could. I walked to him slowly. He met me halfway. I don't remember what I said first. I don't even know if I spoke. But he reached out and touched my shoulder. His hand, enormous, warm, calloused like tree bark. And I broke. Tears I didn't even know I'd been holding slid down my face. I whispered, "You're not just surviving, you're protecting." He nodded. It was the first time I'd seen him do that. Not mimicry. Not a gesture. Just, yes. I sat beside him on a flat stone. The sun dipped lower, casting everything in amber. Light caught in the fur along his back like flame. We didn't speak. We didn't have to. When it was almost dark, I stood. He did too. I touched his arm. I have to go. He didn't move, didn't step back. He looked at me, deep and steady, like he was searching for something he didn't want to lose. And then he did something I wasn't ready for. He turned and pointed, not toward the forest, but toward me, then toward the deer, then the fox, then the birds circling overhead. And I understood. You didn't just save me. You saved them too. You gave all of us something we didn't know we still deserved. A second chance. I stepped forward. He leaned down, and I pressed my forehead to his. The way you do when goodbye isn't a word big enough. When I pulled back, he held something in his hand. A smooth piece of bark, curled like a half-moon. Inside was one of my drawings. One I hadn't seen in weeks. The one I drew of him and the fawn. He'd kept it. I took it, held it to my chest. I won't let them find you, I said. His eyes didn't leave mine. Not even when I turned away. Not even when I started back through the trees. Not even when the sound of helicopters began to rise in the distance like thunder cracking through peace. I didn't stop walking. But I left something behind. A small notebook tucked into the roots of an old cedar, just at the edge of the sanctuary. Inside, I wrote one last thing. If you find this, if any part of you still listens, protect what you do not yet understand, because sometimes the things we fear most are the only ones still trying to keep us whole. It's been 3 years. I still wake before dawn. Every single morning. The air is always coldest around 5. Not enough light to see much. Just outlines of pine trees and the breath leaving your mouth. That's when I feel closest to the forest. Not the part people hike through on weekends. The real part, The old part. The part that still remembers things we've forgotten how to name. After everything happened, after the last helicopters flew out, after the reporters packed up their vans and went looking for something easier to understand, I didn't leave. I stayed, and I built something here. Not to prove anything, not to tell a story, but because the world didn't need another documentary. It needed a place to heal. So I opened a wildlife rescue center on the edge of the forest. It's small, quiet, nothing flashy. A worn wooden sign at the entrance reads, "Haven Refuge," carved by hand with a pocket knife and set in place by an old friend who never said goodbye. We take in injured deer, foxes hit by cars, birds with broken wings. Some survive, some don't, but every single one gets a name. A warm place to rest, a chance. I never tell them why I called it that. I never mention him, but I remember every day. When I walk past the back clearing where we release the animals, I leave behind a small token, a smooth stone, a curl of bark, a piece of fruit wrapped in leaves. And once a week, I set a carved symbol beneath the cedar tree by the stream, his symbol, a circle split by a single line. I don't know if anyone understands it, but that's not the point. It's not for them. Some nights when the wind blows just right, I still hear something move beyond the tree line. Not loud, just enough to make the hair on my arms lift. Sometimes I think I catch a shape in the trees. A figure just outside the firelight, still and watching. I never chase it. I just sit a while longer, and I let it know I'm still here. I kept his memory alive the way I knew he'd want me to, quietly. Without spectacle, but not without meaning. Every animal that comes through our doors gets more than medical care. They get presence, time, hands that don't rush, eyes that see them for more than their injuries. Sometimes I wonder what he would have thought if he saw this. Not the building, but the way people have changed. It's small, but I've seen it. Kids who volunteer over the summer, teens who leave their phones in their backpacks without being told. Old men who used to hunt, now bottle-feeding baby raccoons. It's not a revolution, but it's enough. Then last fall, something strange happened. A hiker got lost 2 ridges past the boundary trail. A storm rolled in fast. Fog thick as milk. Temperatures dropped. Search and rescue teams looked for 2 days. Then, out of nowhere, the man walked back into town. He said he found shelter. Said someone lit a fire for him. Left berries. Didn't speak. Just stood there at the edge of the cave, like a shadow with eyes. People laughed. Said he must have hit his head, but I didn't laugh. He described the smell of cedar, the quiet, the shape, the feeling that he was being protected, not hunted. When he left the clinic, he carried a notebook he found tucked beside him when he woke. He brought it to the station. They turned it in, thinking it belonged to one of the search crew. It didn't. I saw it myself. Brown leather cover, broken elastic, pages filled with old sketches and ink that had faded in the rain. But I knew those drawings. One of them was mine, the one I left behind, the one he kept. On the inside back cover, someone had carved a message in the soft lining. Not drawn, carved, with care. It said, "We don't need to understand to love, but love makes us want to understand." The woman who processed the report said it gave her chills. She thought it sounded like poetry, something ancient. I didn't correct her. That night, I walked alone to the far edge of the clearing and sat in the dark. I didn't speak. I didn't need to. I think he heard me anyway. And maybe that's all this ever was. A conversation between grief and grace, between what we lose and what we're lucky enough to find in the middle of the wreckage. Between 2 hearts, one wild, one breaking, that somehow met in the woods and decided, for a moment, to sit beside each other and not be afraid. I don't know where he is now, but I know he's still out there, and I know this much. He was never a monster. He was a guardian of forests, of children, of broken women trying to forgive themselves. And when the wind moves through the trees just right, I still believe he's listening, still watching, still waiting for the world to become quiet enough to deserve him again. Sometimes, healing doesn't come with fanfare. It doesn't arrive in answers or loud triumphs. It happens slowly, like light slipping through cracks in the trees, or warmth returning to a hand that forgot how to feel. The quietest moments often carry the loudest truths, and in the spaces between fear and understanding, we often find the most sacred kind of connection. This wasn't just a story about the unknown. It wasn't about proving or explaining. It was about presence, about how compassion can take shape in the unlikeliest of forms. About how, even in the wildest parts of the world, or ourselves, there's still a place for kindness. Still room for something gentle to survive. There's a beauty in the things we don't fully understand, in the mystery that asks us to pause instead of run, to listen instead of label. The things we fear, they often fear us too. And yet when given space, when met with patience, they don't rise up to destroy us. They offer something else entirely. Stillness, protection, even love. Maybe that's the point. That we don't need to understand everything to honor it. That coexistence isn't built on conquest, but on reverence. That sometimes, the most powerful act is simply choosing not to look away. What if the wild isn't something to tame, but something to learn from? What if the things we call strange or dangerous are simply reflections of our own wounded parts, waiting to be seen with gentler eyes? We live in a world that moves too fast, that demands proof and spectacle. But not everything sacred needs a spotlight. Some things, some truths, are meant to be felt in the quiet, kept close, protected not because they're fragile, but because they're rare. So wherever you are, whatever you carry, may you remember this. The things that matter most don't always speak in words. Sometimes they come as a gesture, a symbol, a moment of silence beside another beating heart. And sometimes they come from the woods. Thank you for walking with us through this journey. If this story moved something in you, if it made you think, feel, or simply pause, we'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next story. And if you know someone who needs this kind of quiet magic in their life, share it with them. Because maybe, just maybe, we're all looking for a place to belong, even if we don't know it yet. From our heart to yours, thank you.